Hello, and welcome back to Kings Across the Pod, the official podcast of the KCL American Politics Society, hosted by Roar News. My name is Patrick Schnecker. I'm the president of the American Politics Society, and I'll be your host today. At the time of recording this, it has been exactly a week since the 2024 U.S. presidential election. We now officially know that Donald Trump has been chosen to be America's 47th president, beating Kamala Harris by 312 electoral college votes to 226, and by 74.8 million to 71.4 million in the popular vote. The Republican Party has also won a majority in the Senate with 53 seats, and although a close race, they are on track to maintain their majority in the House of Representatives too. This would mean that the GOP would have a majority in all branches of government, if you include the 6 Republican-appointed justices in the Supreme Court too. To discuss the highlights of the election year, the key moments for both parties, the main reason for the broad Republican victory, and the future of the Democratic Party, I'm joined by 3 amazing guests. 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, and 1 non-affiliated independent. If you all want to just briefly introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Daniel Marks. I'm a first-year student studying digital media and culture, and I'm a Democrat.
Hi, I'm Kayla Rahaman. I am a third year studying History and International Relations and news editor for Roar News.
Hi, I'm Jaime Abengoechea. I'll be your Republican today, and I'm studying biomedical engineering.
All right, I thought we'd start with some highlights of this past year. It's obviously been a very, very busy year. So I'll start on the Republican side, and then we'll move to the Democratic side as well. So since winning the primaries, you virtually saw a piece of breaking news regarding the Trump campaign every single week, whether it was the hush money trial, the assassination attempt, his VP pick in J.D. Vance. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I'll start with Jaime here as a resident Republican today. What would you say was the lowest moment of Trump's election campaign, and what was the climax that ultimately led him to victory last week?
I think his lowest moment was probably a few weeks after Kamala got chosen to replace Joe Biden. I think every politician has sort of a honeymoon period where people are just finding out about them, they seem like a fresh new face, and they appeared to be doing really, really well in the polls. That discouraged a lot of Republicans massively because we suddenly saw a very big lead from the Democrat side, something to which we were really not accustomed to after the debate.
And any highest moments, anything that really helped him?
In my opinion, would probably be around the RNC, specifically Trump's appearance after the assassination attempt, where we basically saw that he was okay, that the campaign was still going strong, and I think the polls do show that he was doing really well at the time.
I mean, certainly, I think so. The assassination attempt obviously helps any politician. We've seen this in the past as well. Whenever someone gets shot, their ratings just really skyrocket.
Actually, if I may make a really quick point, another really big high point I might be I almost forgot about was the debate against Joe Biden. I mean, obviously, that was sort of a different race altogether, right? Because it was against a different Democratic candidate. But Trump surged after that debate. The fact that they had to change the candidate that late in the game just shows how well Trump was doing at the time.
We will get onto that as well, because that is very interesting on the other side of the aisle, how the candidate change affected this whole race. But sticking to Trump for 1 second, Kayla, what impact would you say the assassination attempt had? Obviously, we saw his polls skyrocket, as we already mentioned. Did that kind of the first trial in June, then the assassination attempt in July, did it almost seem like Trump for once was the victim and not the bully?
Yeah, pretty much. I think that the assassination attempt made him martyr without actually having to die. The election, I think, ultimately was about problems with the establishment of U.S. government, and Trump was, whether you liked him or not, the anti-establishment candidate with a chance of winning. And the trials and the assassination attempt, I think for any Republican looking at that would say, they're trying to take down the only person who is standing against them.
Daniel, any thoughts?
About the assassination attempt? Yeah, I definitely think, I remember at the time, I was actually in the UK over the summer, and I woke up to see on my phone in my family chat that they were texting, Trump has just been shot. And at the time, the immediate reaction was that that's him winning the election. Yep. That's what won him the election. I think a lot happened, obviously, after that, in between, but I do think that was a major point, for the Trump campaign.
I think moving on to the other side of the aisle, we saw the Democrats experiencing a slightly different campaign trail. President Biden originally ran for re-election before dropping out and being replaced by Vice President Harris. I mean, with ups and downs in both campaign trails, the same question applies to you. What was the highest moment for the Democratic Party in 2024, and what ultimately led to the demise of the party during this election?
Yeah. I'd say the high probably for a lot of people was right when Joe Biden dropped out and that immediate surge of momentum that Kamala Harris had. And I think I might point specifically to right when she announced Tim Walz as her VP. And I think a lot of people were very excited for what was to come. And obviously, I think they made some regrettable choices. And so I'd say, yeah, definitely the lowest point was last Tuesday. And overall, my thoughts on it, on the biggest reason why it did not go their way, was because I think that there was kind of, with the momentum that came with Kamala Harris being announced as the new candidate, there was kind of almost like a new frontier being charted for the Democratic Party that they very much quickly abandoned. I think they kind of went back to their old ways, leaning into just kind of like the sanctimony that's often plagues the Democratic Party that turns a lot of people off. They kind of leaned into neoliberalism, neoconservatism, parading Liz Cheney on stage, with just doing things that don't really appeal to many people, things that people don't care about. I've been saying to people since the election that Donald Trump is a populist. And I think if you want to have a chance of defeating a populist, unfortunately, maybe you might not like it, but you need to fight populism with populism. And that's not what they did. Kamala Harris is not a populist. She's not someone that can appeal to large swaths of people and have, like big rhetoric that attracts many people. I think you in 2028, if they want to win, I think what you will see, I don't know if this will happen because I don't know if they'll learn, is you're going to have somebody that comes in and can call out kind of the BS that happens in the Democratic Party, someone who can do what Donald Trump did to the Republicans, who can flip it on its head. And they might alienate the base for a little bit, but they'll attract a new branch of voters, and then eventually the base will return to them. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Does this mean the Democratic Party moving further to the left or further to the center? When you say you might alienate some base voters, which base voters would they alienate?
I think they would alienate the liberals, who I think some people might consider left, but I think there's also people who are more left than them. So it's a bit confusing. I think there was a move to the center in this election, which I don't think they benefited from. So I do think you actually do need a bit more of a move farther to the left, where I think something that was also very much absent in this election cycle for the Democrats was one big progressive policy that they could campaign on, which you've seen in previous very successful Democrat campaigns. Like with Obama, you heard Medicare for all. I think it was less prominent, but for Joe Biden, they talked about student loan forgiveness. And those were two like big points of policy that they could point to. And I think that was kind of absent from this campaign. A lot of people saw this. The only thing that they had was, we are not Donald Trump. We're going to get all these, what lots of people consider to be rhinos, Republicans in name only, to just talk about how bad Donald Trump is and how he might be a threat to democracy. And maybe he is, but I think the reality is most Americans don't care. And they really care about the economy. If you're a steel worker in Pennsylvania and your factory is closing, you don't really care what Donald Trump said about this or that. That doesn't affect your life. If he said they're eating the dogs, it doesn't really matter to you. If you think that he's going to improve your life financially, that's what matters to you. And I think time and time again, the Democrats have gotten scared. I think that, what I was saying with the early momentum with Kamala Harris being announced and Tim Walz, if you remember, there was that whole thing that calling them weird, which was very effective. And they very much, I think, quickly abandoned that. I think they got scared. They went back to their old ways. Tim Walz was more progressive, and I think they kind of muted him in a lot of that respect. And he had to kind of just stand by and defend certain policies that you could tell he wasn't very passionate about. I think you saw that in the vice presidential debate. You could tell when he kind of lights up when he talks about something that he really actually cares about, and then when there's something that it's just a line for the Democrats that he needs to deliver.
Jaime, Daniel mentioned that the Democrats lacked that one policy, that one specific target that they could really hone in on their voters. Did Trump win? Did the Republicans in general win because they had that policy target?
I will answer your question. I think they did. I think they did, and actually, not only one, but they had multiple, which allowed them to appeal to many different kinds of voters. Because one-issue voters are a thing, right? But that's not even that. They had many issues that they really campaigned well on. But I do want to make a point about something you said, which is you said that Kamala didn't really appeal to a lot of people that would have liked her criticizing the Democratic Party or calling out their BS. I think you're right about that, but I think she was also at a disadvantage in that case. And any Democrat would have been at a disadvantage in her position because she didn't have a primary. And I think she could have never had a primary because of campaign money. If you don't have a primary, you can't really call out your other people because you're not debating against people in your party. And what I will also say to answer your question is that the Republicans campaigned heavily on the issue of immigration, right, which allowed them to appeal to a lot of voters that live in border states that maybe have been experiencing heavy cases of migration. Maybe they correlated to crime going up. A lot of people don't like illegal immigration. Another big issue for Donald Trump, apart from immigration, has been Biden's inflation, right? Whether we like it or not, a lot of people just vote with their wallets. I think you're absolutely right about the economy, and inflation was clearly visible to a lot of Americans. It's really in your face when you have to buy groceries every week. And Trump really took advantage of that, and he took advantage of it successfully.
Kayla, you're from California,
Yep.
right? That's typically a very blue state. But we have seen this year a lot of smaller districts actually flip and turn red, which is incredibly unusual for California.
Not only smaller districts, but some of the largest districts in the state.
Exactly. A lot of people would assume that, yeah, sure, you'll have a few rural, small areas that are red. But you're right. Some of the bigger districts did also turn red. In California, if we're seeing California develop this not necessarily anti-Democrat agenda, because it isn't, but why do you think these bigger districts are coming out and saying, we don't want Harris in power, we would rather have someone like Trump, even though it essentially goes against everything California stood for decades now?
Well, the first thing is that California did vote blue. So we're not talking about the state flipping. We're talking about underneath the surface level of, everybody knows that California is one of the, is the safest state for Harris. Within that, you have a very large and growing sense of discontentment towards the Democrats. I think a lot of this is not just, it's not just against Harris, who of course was also Attorney General of California and Senator from California, but also against Gavin Newsom, and a sense that he has severely mismanaged California's economy. And within California, you have this Democratic hegemony that's based on the coastal areas and the big cities, but you actually have also a large swath of the state that their reality, their lives are much more kind of aligned to what somebody, say, in Nevada or even in the Midwest might be experiencing. It's a very rural state as well, large agricultural sector, and also, of course, we are on the border with Mexico, and so you have to consider this as well. I think that you're seeing within California just a sense of being left behind by the the elites of the state, and that is something that's what people were voting on, was saying look, we don't like Newsom, we don't like Harris, and they both kind of represent the same strand of the Democratic Party that we're angry with. I'm from one of the red districts in California, and it's just very interesting because I'm now surrounded by people who are championing the fact that our state is the 5th largest economy in the world and is a leader in climate action around the world. We're not focusing on these things. We're focusing on the housing and migration and the influx of low-wage workers and things like this that really get people riled up, and also a lot of religious conservatism as well, and the culture war. So.
As I mentioned in the introduction, it looks as though the Republicans will get a clean sweep, controlling all branches of government for at least the next 2 years. When we look at pollsters and general predictions in the weeks coming up to November 5th, people predicted that this would, myself included, on the first episode of this podcast, we predicted that this will be the closest race since Bush versus Al Gore in 2000, potentially being decided by only a few thousand votes. Did any of you really expect the actual result, And why do you think there was such a red wave in the end?
I wasn't expecting the result. I mean, I think definitely this election specifically is going to be a big paradigm shift for U.S. politics. I think a lot of these very trusted sources of pollsters tracking these specific numbers, I think people are now going to have much more doubt. And I think they probably should have even after 2016. I think 2020 was kind of this like liminal period that put it back one way, how it kind of used to be for a little bit. So then people kind of kept their guard down. I think that voters most of the time vote on vibes. It might sound silly, but with the Democrats, even if numbers-wise you might think you are better on something, if you say, well, technically our economy's better, well, technically immigration is not as bad as they're saying. If people feel that it is, it doesn't matter if you tell them, well, it's actually not that bad, so don't worry about it. And I think that's a big rejection from a lot of the voter base. And I think that's a big issue. And I think when it is that way, when people are voting on vibes, which I think most of the time is how people do vote, you need someone who's a very effective communicator and can communicate those large ideas very well to the American people. And I agree with what you were saying earlier. I feel bad for Kamala Harris. I'm not putting all the blame on her. I think there's a lot more blame to go around to other people. I think she was very much swept up into it. And I don't think she was the best speaker. And I think that's probably why she didn't do a 3-hour podcast with Joe Rogan, because I don't think she really can be in that kind of environment, speaking more casually for such a prolonged period of time. And it might have been maybe a more hostile environment to her compared to Trump. I just don't think she was able to do that. And I think there are a lot more effective communicators in the Democratic Party. And I think that's why you saw a lot of flipping of these smaller counties. I think for so long in the Democratic Party, it's almost like a rain check on everything. They're like, well, we know that's an issue, but vote for us this time and then we'll catch you later on that issue. I think, for some people it was Gaza, for some people it's lots of other things. For as much conversation there was about Project 2025 and what the Republicans had planned, which I think is concerning, but why was there no Democrat version of Project 2025? Why was there no meticulously crafted document for every step of policy that they were going to do once elected? It often feels like there's no plan, and it's like, elect us and then we'll figure out the plan. We're going to put out Joe Biden's manifesto from 2020 and we're going to add 4 more pages. Yeah, look, we have policy. Not really.
No, and you're right. And it's also, to be honest, I will say this about Kamala Harris. I agree with you that she's not a very good speaker. I don't think she was the right candidate, and I think if it wasn't for the campaign money, she probably shouldn't have been the candidate at all. I'll also say this. She's been basically forced to change her views on everything. If you look at her performance in the 2020 primaries, the Democratic primaries, it was absolutely atrocious. Tulsi Gabbard basically destroyed her in many debates, and I don't like using that word in debates because it takes away from a lot of the logic in debates and makes it just a competition of who's the better communicator. But when you're in politics, it does matter. Being a good communicator does matter. I think Tulsi Gabbard would have been a much better VP pick, and the fact that they lost her was definitely a big blow to the Democrats. Because Trump did appear suddenly like the moderate, even though he was the anti-establishment candidate, he also appeared like the moderate candidate because he suddenly got the endorsement from RFK, he suddenly got the endorsement from Tulsi Gabbard. Like, that looked like a much better coalition than what the Democrats were presenting, which is the worst part of the Republican Party in Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney, plus what they were presenting being themselves. I think whoever thought that up surely shouldn't be involved in the next campaign for the Democrats if they want to win.
I mean, looking at the future of both parties, where do you see, and we'll start with the Republican Party, so Jaime, I'll come back to you. Sure. Where do you see the Republican Party in the next 4 years, or America in general in the next 4 years? And are there any particular issues that you see Trump's presidency really focusing on until 2028?
Yes and no. I think there's a few things that I really can't predict. Like, foreign policy-wise, I don't know what will happen. Trump has made a lot of promises regarding that. And I really don't know if he'll be able to make do on those.
Will we see him solve the Russia-Ukraine war before he steps into office, like he said? Or was that just another Trump persona?
I don't know. That's such a hard question because...
It depends what solving is, right?
Exactly, that's the thing. Because maybe he could end it, right? But he might not end it in a way that makes everybody happy. Well, he's definitely not going to end it in a way that makes everybody happy, but he might not end it in a way that makes us as Europeans living in the west of Europe very happy. What I will say is a lot of Republicans believe that he will end it by basically splitting Ukraine in half, right? and giving Ukraine, basically making Russia pay for the rebuilding of Ukraine, and also paying reparations. That's not really what Russia has agreed to do right now. That's not been proposed by the Republican Party officially, so I don't know if it'll happen. I don't want to make a prediction on something that we really don't know anything about. But he does have a really good track record with foreign policy, though, so I will give him that. He did really well in his first term, foreign policy-wise. He did look like a very inflammatory president, and in many ways he was. But when you actually look at his performance, he managed to diffuse a lot of tensions in a lot of situations with foreign nations.
I think these are the two sides of the foreign policy argument, and we won't stay on it too much because I do want to get to our Democrat guest over here. But these are generally the two sides to Trump's foreign policy. On the one hand, people will say he was great foreign policy-wise because he was the first president in decades who didn't start a new war. He was very, yes, unpredictable, but somehow it worked because it's Trump and people feared him. On the other hand, you'll see many people saying that actually this unpredictability isn't sustainable and that you can't be unpresidential foreign policy-wise because it gets very dangerous and then it leads to mutually assured destruction at a certain point. So these are often the two sides to that debate. But going to our Democrat, Daniel, where do you see America in 2028? Do you see it better off or worse off than it is right now?
It's a tough question, especially as we've seen in the past week that making such predictions can be quite a precarious game to do. I think...
Well, join us. That's the fun of the podcast. You make weird predictions and then you look stupid or
exactly.
You look great.
So maybe I'll sound like an idiot in 4 years. We'll see. Someone can pull this back up. I think it could go two ways. I think that there's a chance that Trump will follow up on a lot of the things that he says he's going to do and plans to do. And I think that could be quite destructive. I think advancing this kind of socially conservative agenda in America might damage a lot of people's lives. But at the same time, I also think there's a large chance that he doesn't do much of it. I think, personally, there's a lot of his campaigning was to stay out of jail. And so I think there's a chance he gets in there and he pardons himself and he doesn't do too much. I don't think he was that much of a transformative president from 2016 to 2020. I think there were bad decisions that he made that some people might think were quite destructive. But overall, I think America was more or less the same. I mean, I think the political sphere was changed and the way we have discussions, and I think we became more polarized. But overall, not much changed. So I think there's a chance that happens again, where, he's been reelected. He doesn't have to worry about getting elected again. So he just kind of pardons himself and sits in the White House and, just chills for 4 years. But
what about for the Democrats in 2028? It's looking like Harris is going to step back from leading the party now, or that's what people are speculating. Who do you see as the next generation of Democratic leaders?
I think that's also a tough question. I mean, when Harris gave her concession speech, I think it was very interesting. She didn't sound like a person that seemed very disappointed. She almost seemed relieved. It's kind of a weird dynamic to be spending the whole election telling everybody that this is the most important election of our lives when it comes to defending democracy. But then, as I was saying earlier, that they always do, well, there's always next time. We'll get them next time. I think it was a good speech, but it was a bit of a weird speech. The sentiment kind of came off in an odd way. But when it comes to the future of the Democratic Party, I mean, personally, I'm worried about it because I think what you're now seeing very much quickly in the aftermath of the election, a lot of the left-wing pundits, a lot of the Democrat media, I think are not learning from what this outcome is saying. I think their takeaway is, well, we focused way too much on social justice issues. We lost the election because we focused way too much on trans issues and all this stuff. And I really don't think that's what the lesson is. And I think if they take that away, then you're probably going to lose again. I think when you see Nancy Pelosi do an interview in the New York Times saying, the Democrats haven't abandoned the working class. We are the working class. I think that's just such a tone-deaf statement. I mean, when your husband is like one of the most successful stock traders in the country, when a lot of people believe that you're an inside trader and you're saying, well, I'm working class. The Democrat Party represents the working class. I think it's very laughable. I mean, I'm from DC. I very much have experienced the bubble that a lot of these people live in. I generally think that's why they do a lot of what they do. I think it's very much just a bubble and ignorance. And I think that there's a lot that they don't want to reckon with. So I think there's a worry that they won't reckon with it. overall names that I think you could see in 2020 or 2028, I think you might see Gretchen Whitmer. I think you might see Josh Shapiro. I think Tim Walz will just stay a governor. I think he'll kind of leave the electoral sphere when it comes to running for president. There's a chance. I think she will be old enough. I think AOC will probably, if not in 2028, maybe the election after that, she might sit this one out strategically. But I worry that there's going to be that continuing shift to the center and maybe even more to the right, where they're almost just like becoming the Republican Party before Trump, rather than learning from their mistakes and learning that they need to be different.
Dick Cheney is there now.
Exactly.
So that's the Republican Party before Trump.
I mean, yeah. I don't want Dick Cheney. I mean, it's so absurd when this man was vilified by Democrats up until, up until he endorsed Kamala Harris, and all of a sudden he's like this like golden boy that we're parading, and we're going to the Cheney family reunion with Kamala Harris.
Especially when
this is exactly why so many people are done with the Democrats.
It was quite absurd.
Yeah, but I also think it's like also the worst time to get an endorsement from the Cheney family.
Yeah.
Because people are already accusing you of being warmonger, right?
Yes.
And proclaiming that Trump is the peace
I have
president.
an idea.
I mean,
Exactly.
I mean, there's a saying: Democrats fight with pillows, Republicans fight with meat cleavers. I think that Democrats always are focused on being prudent and making the most cautious choices, and that ends up costing them more in the long run. I mean, look at all the things that Trump has said. He's said some things that you might say, oh, well, that's going to lose him the election. That's a crazy thing to say. But people don't really care about that. And I think they often go for the safer choice. When you look at the 2020 primary of the Democratic candidates, Joe Biden was the second to of the main 6 candidates, he was the second to last least donated candidate, which is quite crazy that they then decided to, they didn't decide, but the voters decide. But obviously there is some influence that the party and the convention has. And
to be honest, again, by looking at the 2020 primaries, Joe Biden probably wouldn't have won if you just looked at all the candidates ideologically. It's just a lot of people on the Democrat side thought Bernie was unelectable. I think he would have. I don't think he would have won if he ran against Trump in 2020. I do think Bernie's a bit unelectable and way too controversial. Just like AOC, that's why I don't think AOC is going to become a super important member of the Democrat Party.
Well, they said the same thing about Trump, but the issue with the Democratic Party is that they're not understanding what the actual vibes are. You said that we vote on vibes, and it's true, we do. And the Democratic Party is not understanding that the vibe is not status, like business as usual. It's not prudence. The vibe is something is broken, and we need somebody to come in and just admit it. And that's why in 2016, Bernie Sanders was such a popular candidate among young people. It's why Trump was a popular candidate. But the Republican Party backed Trump and with wild success for them politically, and the Democratic Party backed the waning glory of the Obama high.
I'm not a Bernie bro, but I honestly do think he could have won in 2016 and possibly 2020. He was the most donated to Democratic candidate in the primary. He also had the most individual donations. I think, people use buzzwords like socialist, communist, whatever. I think he is someone who is a very good communicator and can explain those policies. Obviously, I think he's too old now. I think the time has passed, unfortunately. But
he's a mentor now.
Yeah, but sometimes it does feel like the Democrat Party would rather lose to Donald Trump and have Donald Trump in the White House than have Bernie Sanders in the White House, because I think it does threaten the kind of status quo in the party and the people that do have control.
They made people quit at specific points during the primaries. And what happens in the Democratic Party, for people who don't know this, is that when you quit to keep a party, basically the party unified under a candidate, you have to endorse the most popular candidate, even if it is by a tiny margin, even if they're the most popular candidate by a tiny margin, and if you don't agree with them. So what happened is Bernie was basically about to beat Biden in the polls, right? And they told Amy Klobuchar, you're gonna quit right now. You're gonna endorse Joe Biden. Let's give him your votes, and that's why Biden kept having the lead until Bernie eventually had to endorse him.
Yeah.
Just before you wrap up, Jaime, is there any upcoming Democrats that you fear can, play strong opposition to the Republican Party, whether in 2028 or even before then?
I think it would have to be an outsider. I really do think it would have to be an outsider.
No one that's there right now?
Probably not. I mean, a lot of people the thing about social media nowadays is that everybody has one thing that's going to make them really bad, which immediately disqualifies so many people from going into politics at a really high stage. I think, for example, if you look at Tim Walz, right? I think Tim Walz is definitely too old, right? I think he's past his prime. But I also think like if you look at anybody that's even mildly pro-life, you suddenly are going to be biased against him because his state has no abortion restrictions, right? Which immediately makes him very controversial again. And I think a lot of Democrats have that issue, and which is one of the reasons why I think it has to be an outsider.
I think that this election, a lot of people are saying this, and it's the reason why ultimately I wanted to vote for Kamala Harris. I really did, but I felt like I just couldn't in the end. And I think that the reason people felt this way is because the Democratic Party just refuses to learn their lessons. A year ago, I wrote an article for the Politics Society about why minorities probably will not be going like in droves towards the Democrats this year. And like we see this week, that turned out to be the case. And it's because they don't own us, and they act like they own us. They act like they could say, look, we have your best interests in mind. We'll deal with what you actually need later. Just vote for us. Just let us in. We've seen administration after administration that is just not what happens. They promise us that they have our better interests in mind, and then they effectively do what what we are just as concerned the Republicans will do. And so I wanted to go back to your point about the threat of democracy in this election and how that was kind of bigged up as the main selling point for Kamala Harris, and why her concession speech seemed to be so lackluster, kind of like muted. If this is such a big threat, then why are we not treating this as a big crisis? It's because the only thing that they were running on is that Trump is so outlandishly dangerous to the state of the country and the state of the world that we have to get him out. And so her speech, the vibe was tone it down, crisis management, let's be better than the insurrectionists. Like, the Democrats' campaign was purely on the defensive this election. They had no active positions. Yes, you can go on the platform page and you can read if you compare the GOP platform page to Kamala Harris's platform, one of them is more fleshed out than the other. And spoiler alert, it was Kamala Harris's. But that didn't matter because they were not actually telling anybody about what they have to offer. If you go on the platform page, it was, this is what we have to offer, and then in big red, Project 2025. That was it. We look at the behavior of the Democratic Party, not just the presidential campaign, but also in Congress, like with the border bill. The only reason for that border bill was so that we could prove that we're actually more Republican, than you think we are.
Yeah. And
then the Republicans knock it down, and we see all of this, and it's like, I think I heard somebody just describe it all as political theater with that bipartisan bill. That it's just being propped up by the Democrats to get a vote. The Republicans knock it down so that they can't get that vote.
No, the Republicans knocked it down because most of the spending wasn't going to the border. It was a border bill in name only.
And Trump said that it would be a political gift to Biden's campaign.
Again, maybe, but again, every time I've seen a Republican, probably, yeah, you're right. But every time I've seen a Republican knock it down, it's because they basically 80% of the spending wasn't allocated to the border bill. It was just them putting plans that they wanted to do and wanting to get it passed by saying that it's a border bill.
Calling it a border bill, but then also the Hispanic caucus was not even involved in the negotiations for this bill, and so they opposed it. Like it was represented as this bipartisan bill. The Democrats are actually tough on immigration. The Hispanic caucus was not involved in saying like, look, this is actually, there's no provision to actually protect our rights on this bill. So shocker, Latino voters don't want to vote for the Democrats. And I mean, I can go on listing other cases, but I've spoken a lot, so.
Just so we can conclude and get some final thoughts, or one final thought from the three of you today. Ideally in one word, just so we can make it fun and get your brains ticking. Can you summarize or predict the next 4 years under President-elect Donald Trump? I'll start with Daniel.
Hectic.
Kayla? Can you beat hectic? Negotiable. He is a businessman. Jaime, the next 4 years under Donald Trump, one word.
I'm going to say conclusive.
Negotiable
and conclusive and hectic. Good balance. Very good balance.
Very representative of our...
Very representative. All right. Well, thank you to the three of you for coming on today. I really appreciate it. And we hope to have you back at the American Politics Society. And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoy, and we'll see you at the next one.